Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll allow 5 minutes um, to just allow a few more people to log in. But thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give it a few more minutes to allow some more people to sign in. Thank you for your patience. Okay, thank you everyone for your patience, and thank you again for joining us today on the Ready Up NYC webinar series. My name is Abigail, and I am part of the Ready New York team here at New York City Emergency Management. And today we will cover the topic of emergency planning and outreach in residential buildings. Our guest speakers include Julian Bizel from FDNY, Captain Michael Kozel, also from FDNY, and Jessica Bouchard from Housing Preservation Department, other known as HPD. So to start, we want you to be aware of some of the hazards that you may face in New York City. So something like a fire, a gas leak, a power outage, maybe a flash flood, a heat wave, or even a coastal storm. And these are just some of the emergencies or hazards that we want you to think about to prepare for in the case of an emergency. And now I will pass it off to Julian.
Good morning.
Hey, Julian, I think you're on mute. You may have to unmute yourself again.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. No
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Julian Basil, New York City Fire Department Fire Code Counsel. The New York City Fire Code requires that building owners post certain notices and prepare and distribute certain emergency preparedness materials to apartment building residents and building staff. After two fatal apartment building fires in 1999, the City Council passed a local law that required distribution of a fire safety guide and the posting of a fire safety notice on apartment dwelling unit doors. Since then, these requirements have been developed and expanded, and in 2018, the guide was expanded to an all-hazard emergency preparedness guide for apartment buildings, and other emergency preparedness materials and notices have been required to be distributed and posted. I'd like to go through them now and explain their importance. First and foremost is the fire safety notice that is supposed to be posted inside the main entrance of each dwelling unit in an apartment building. This is a critical notice in terms of advising apartment building residents of what to do or providing guidance of what to do in the event of a fire in the building or in the apartment. There are two versions, one for apartment buildings that are of fireproof construction, modern buildings of concrete and steel structures, as well as a different notice for buildings, older buildings of combustible construction. And essentially, as we'll talk about further in a while, this is to alert people of what to do if a fire is in their apartment and they have to leave, the importance of closing the door behind you, of first checking that the halls are safe. And in other situations where to determine whether or not you should shelter in place or if you have to evacuate, to determine whether or not it's safe to do so. You should have a fire safety notice on the inside of your apartment door. And if you don't have one, you should contact the landlord or managing agent and ask for one. If you don't receive a satisfactory response, you should contact the fire department. The other important thing that everyone should receive and read is the New York City Apartment Building Emergency Preparedness Guide. As I said, in 2018, this was updated to include all hazards. It's supposed to be distributed at the time you occupy your apartment at lease signing, and then it's distributed every 3 years. This guide provides a wealth of information. I'll talk more about it in a minute, about all different kinds of situations and what apartment resident should be aware of and might need to do. Part of the emergency preparedness guide or accompanying it is something called the building information section. This is a one-page form that is specific to your building and describes key aspects of your building's construction and safety features, including whether it's of fireproof or non-fireproof construction, whether it's sprinklered, and whether how many means of egress and where they exit to. All of this information is important because if you read the guide and you develop your own escape plan or evacuation plan, it's important that you know this information, as it will be a factor. In addition, the fire department requires that a copy of the fire safety notice and the building information section be posted in the building lobby to indicate compliance and to allow enforcement. Now, in recent years, in response to other fatal apartment fires, the City Council has passed some additional emergency preparedness requirements, especially with a focus on people with disabilities and functional limitations that require that they prepare for what they might have to do in the event they have to evacuate and need assistance. The fire department has developed and published in its rules and posted on its website an apartment building individual emergency preparedness and evacuation planning checklist that's designed to help individual apartment building residents work through some of the information that's in the guide and think through about some of the issues that they may have. All residents should receive a copy. It was originally distributed by itself, and now it should be distributed every time the guide is distributed to building residents. Additionally, all of this material is posted on the fire department's website. So anytime you want to get a copy, you can always go to the fire codes page and look under help resources. Next slide. As I indicated, the guide is distributed once every 3 years. And that was done simply because it was felt it was unnecessary to distribute the same thing over and over again. 3 years allows it to be updated and changes made to reflect new conditions. In the off years, we require building owners to distribute what we call an annual fire and emergency preparedness bulletin, which is a short up to 4-page document that the fire department posts on its website in the summer for distribution later in the year, which is intended to sort of highlight important fire safety or other emergency preparedness issues. In the past one addressed the importance of closing the door after there was when exiting a fire, when escaping from a fire and exiting your apartment and entering the stairwell, the importance of closing the doors to contain the fire. I would say that in future bulletins, you will almost certainly be reading about the hazards associated with e-bikes and other lithium-ion batteries, their storage and charging. This is intended to update you on important issues in this area that people should be aware of. The City Council has also required that a hurricane evacuation zone notice be posted in the lobby of the building. And this is something that OEM has developed. New York City Emergency Management has developed evacuation zone notices that advise building occupants of which evacuation zone they're in case there are coastal storms or other conditions that require evacuation of areas near the water. There are two other notices which are HPD related, housing preservation and development related notices, and I'll let them explain what they are.
Thanks, Julian. As Julian mentioned, there are a couple of notices that are required for residential building owners to post. And one of them is the gas leak notice. And property owners of residential buildings are required to provide tenants with a notice regarding procedures that should be followed when a gas leak is suspected. This information should be posted in a common area of the building, but also provided to each tenant and prospective tenant with the lease or lease renewal form. And there's also a temporary notice that is required in emergencies where owners of residential buildings that have tenants in them are required to post an emergency notification prior to the arrival of a weather emergency, after a natural disaster, and after being informed that a utility outage will last for more than 24 hours. If it's a known natural disaster that is coming up, like a coastal storm, HPD will message out to property owners that we have in our system and remind them about posting the disaster response signage as part of that message. If you live in a building and the gas leak notice is not in a common area of the building, please ask your landlord or property manager to post that. And if you don't get a satisfactory response, you can call 311 to file a complaint for HPD.
Okay, next slide. Thank you, Jessica. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the apartment building emergency preparedness guide, which as I indicated earlier, has a wealth of information that you might want to know about fire safety and emergency preparedness. Just quickly, in terms of emergency preparedness basics, the importance of staying informed, the understanding that in many cases, it's better to shelter in place in your apartment than trying to evacuate during a fire if you're not in immediate danger. When you need to evacuate, things that you need to take into consideration, and planning ahead to connect up with your family members who may not be with you. That all of that is covered by emergency preparedness basics. The guide also focuses on issues associated with people who need assistance in who would need assistance in evacuating from the building, the importance of considering what you would need to do to get out in terms and looking for someone to provide that assistance, which is an important conversation you should have with your building owner and or neighbors. And other addressing issues of communicating with emergency responders, and also for people who are neighbors of people who would need assistance, encouraging you to offer assistance to them if you're able to do so. There's also readiness information about readiness supplies if there's going to be a need to shelter in place during a power outage or other reason. And the emergency management, of course, has a lot of materials about go bags and home emergency supply kits. Home safety and fire prevention has a lot to do with the importance of smoke detectors, smoke alarms, and carbon monoxide alarms, which are critical life-saving issues, and a variety of fire prevention tips that are critical to preventing fires, in proper use of or non-use of extension cords, use of your stove, window gates, not blocking egress, all things of that sort. Knowing your building is part of what's addressed by that building information section. It explains what the different types of building construction are and what the importance of that. It explains if your building has a sprinkler system, how that works and why that's important and how that can help. If your building has a fire alarm system. It also talks about means of egress from the building, the different ways out of the building, and not using elevators during fires and other important information. And then it has, in a manner similar to the fire safety notice, it reviews what to do in a fire or a non-fire emergency. And in the non-fire emergency category, it addresses a whole range of emergencies, including medical emergencies. What happens if you have to call 911 because of a medical emergency, notifying your building staff to or neighbors to facilitate them locating your apartment and expediting their arrival. Utility emergencies, weather emergencies, hazardous material emergencies, building explosions and collapses, and we've even included information about active shooters, even though that doesn't happen that often in an apartment building, but it's information that everyone should know wherever they are. And finally, there's a list of emergency preparedness resources, links to various agency websites that provide additional information about all of these things.
And we did have a question come in the chat. If these notices aren't posted, what should residents be doing, or who should they be contacting in that case? Maybe Julian
Yeah.
or Jessica can answer this.
Well, with regard to fire department fire code required notices, they should, we would encourage you, the first thing to do is to reach out to the landlord or to the managing agent and, advise them that, it's your understanding the building is supposed to have fire safety notices on the door. They're supposed to distribute the guide and these other materials, and that you haven't received it. And you should get a prompt response, and presumably a notice should be posted if it's already been prepared. If you're having difficulty obtaining a response, or you're not getting satisfactory compliance, then you should contact the fire department and file a complaint, and we will follow up with the landlord or the managing agent. This applies to all multiple dwellings, which is 3 apartments or more. So, that covers every apartment building pretty much in New York City.
Thank you. And now we'll pass it off to Captain Michael Kozo.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Captain Michael Kozo, the director of the FDNY's Fire Safety Education Unit. I'm here to just share some tips on how to keep homes safe from fire, right? How do we avoid these fires from happening, and what do we do if they do happen? So close the door. This is a message that we are seeing over and over again. I know it really came up again in 2017 when we had that big fire in the Bronx, and now we're seeing it once again, unfortunately, in the Bronx. Close the door. So when escaping a fire in your home, we want you to close the door as you make your exit, but not only as you make your exit from the apartment door itself, but also the more you can isolate that fire by closing as many doors as possible, the better off it's going to be for everybody, not only for the tenants involved in the fire and everyone else in the building, but also for us as firefighters coming to the fire. So if the fire is in a bedroom, let's just say, and you could close the door to the bedroom and any doors in between on your way out as you leave and exit the building, exit your apartment, the better off it will be. Because as we're coming in as firefighters, we're not going to be encountering any kind of heat or smoke. We'll be able to see where we're going. We won't have to waste any of our oxygen until we actually get to the fire apartment, and even maybe inside the apartment if those doors were closed. So we want to make sure that we're closing all the doors as we escape. Obviously, closing the doors saves lives, right? If the door is left open, you're allowing all of these flames and smoke and heat and gases to escape that apartment and contaminate the rest of the building. And what happens? So the fire, the heat, the smoke, it all travels from an area of high pressure and it looks for an area of low pressure. So your fire apartment is an area of high pressure. The second you leave that door open, it is creating an area of low pressure, which is that hallway. And all of that smoke and heat and gases is going to look for that and go right to that area of low pressure, being the hallway. Now, as it contaminates the hallway, it is again building an area of high pressure. So now again, it's looking for an area of low pressure. You open a staircase door, all of that smoke and gases is going to rush into that staircase and shoot straight up the building. So we want to keep these doors closed, allowing everyone else in the building to escape, and again, allowing us as the fire department to get there safely. All residential buildings with 3 or more apartments must have a self-closing door, right? So what are these self-closing doors? These self-closing doors automatically close after the door has been opened by you, right? We ask that people don't tamper with the self-closing hinge or the mechanism, or block the self-closing door, right? We want to make sure that your door opens from the inside without a key. You should not need a key to open your apartment door from the inside. We've seen people with doormats and stuff like that. The problem with the doormat is, as people were running out of their apartment, they're kicking the doormat, unintentionally, and the doormat is landing in between the door and preventing the door from self-closing. So again, we don't want to tamper with any of the mechanisms, and we want to make sure that that door is self-closing. So if you do live in a building with 3 or more apartments and your apartment door is not self-closing, you want to make sure that you notify your property owner. If the issue is not corrected by notifying the property owner, we recommend that you register a complaint by calling 311. Moving on to maintaining smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. They say that having and maintaining working smoke and carbon monoxide alarms reduces your chances of dying in a fire by 50%, right? Hence, working detectors are a critical component of fire safety. They are going to be your early warning sign that something is going on, especially if you're sleeping. If you're sleeping, you're not aware of anything that's going on in your house, right? This fire could be building up in your apartment and you're not really aware of it. Your senses are not awake while you're sleeping, right? So you're not going to smell anything. The only thing that's going to wake you up is by hearing that alarm go off. That will wake you up. So again, it is very important that we have these alarms in our homes and that we are testing them regularly. By regularly, I mean once a month at the very least, we should be checking these alarms. If a carbon monoxide alarm sounds, we want you to get out immediately, call 911. You should have time to open up some windows, right? It's carbon monoxide. So you should have time to open up some windows and allow some fresh air into the apartment. But after that, you want to get outside and you want to call 911. You don't know how much carbon monoxide is in there. You don't know where it's coming from. So we want you to get out, call 911. We'll come in with detectors that will allow us to detect where it's coming from, and we'll be able to mitigate it as soon as possible. Remember that carbon monoxide is undetectable to human senses, right? You can't see it, smell it, taste it, hear it. You have no idea that it's there other than the fact that that carbon monoxide alarm is going off. So pay attention to those alarms and know the difference between the sounds of the alarms. If you have a combination alarm, it's one alarm that alerts you for smoke or fire, and it also alerts you for carbon monoxide. It makes two different noises. It's going to do 3 long beeps for smoke or fire, where it's going to do 4 quick chirps for carbon monoxide. And a lot of people don't know the difference between those 2 noises. So you definitely have to know the sounds that your alarm is making and what those sounds mean, right? The 1 chirp is going to tell you that the battery is dying and the battery needs to be replaced, or that there's a faulty alarm and the alarm needs to be replaced. So you'll hear that chirp once every 30 to 60 seconds. So just know your alarm, know what it means, know the noises that are coming out of it. Property owners are required to provide and install at least 1 approved and operational smoke and carbon monoxide detector in each apartment. However, the tenant is responsible for maintaining the detector, as I mentioned before, right? Maintenance or anybody else is not going to come around to each apartment and start checking people's alarms inside their apartments. So it's the tenant's responsibility to make sure that these alarms are working. If you do not have an operational smoke and carbon monoxide detector, notify your property owner. Again, we do recommend, if the issue is not corrected immediately, that you register a complaint by calling 311. And yes, these alarms, when you are checking them and testing them monthly, you should be vacuuming them. The dust is going to build up in the alarm, and what happens is it's going to start to block the sensors in the alarm. So you want to make sure that it is dusted and cleaned out frequently to keep those sensors clear. There are programs going on with the American Red Cross as well as my unit, the Fire Safety Education Unit, where we are going around and installing alarms for free. So that is a program that is worth looking into. It is with the American Red Cross. You can go online at Sound the Alarm, NYC, and register for those alarms to be installed free of charge. Having an escape plan is the next slide that we have going on. And right, so very important that we have an escape plan in the event of a fire. Everyone in our home should be able to make this plan and practice it regularly. It's crazy. We go into schools all the time, and we go classroom to classroom, and we do fire safety presentations to children all the time. And we ask them, do you know how to get out of your school if there's a fire? If those alarms go off in the school, do you know what to do? And every child knows exactly what to do. We ask them the same question at home. Do you know if your smoke alarm goes off in your home? Do you know how to get out? Do you practice it? Nobody, right? You get those blank stares as if they've never tried this at home. They only do it in school. So again, this is something that is very, very important that we go over with everyone in the home, that we sit down, we make the plan, we point out all the exits that we have in case one way is blocked by fire, we could go another way, and that we practice it. And I'm not asking you to, wake everybody up at 2 o'clock in the morning and smoke out the apartment and practice it. No, you don't have to do it that way. Just simple practice. Let's just, you could set off the alarm when you're testing it, set off the alarm and just have everybody react to that sound of the alarm, get down low on their hands and knees, put their hands on the wall and know exactly which way we're going to get out and make sure we all get out together. Okay. As part of this escape plan is knowing the type of building you live in. You have to know if you live in a fireproof or non-fireproof building, because again, that is going to determine your escape plan. It's going to determine whether you're going to stay in your apartment or whether you're going to get out. Now, as mentioned earlier, all of this information should be posted in the lobby and common area of your building. So what is the difference? I'm not going to get into the difference building wise as far as what a fireproof or non-fireproof building is made of and whatnot. But what you should know is if you live in a fireproof building and the fire is in your apartment, then obviously you're going to get out. You're going to make sure the door closes behind you. That is the same regardless of the type of building you live in, because the fire's in your apartment. You have to get out and you want to close the door behind you. Where it changes is if the fire is not in your apartment. So if you live in a fireproof building and the fire is not in your apartment, it is usually safer to stay inside your apartment rather than enter this hallway or the staircase where you don't know where the fire is located. You don't know if the person left their door open or not. And now you're going to enter and maybe get stuck in a hallway where the hallway is contaminated with smoke and gases or the staircase. So you are safe inside your apartment in a fireproof building, as opposed to a non-fireproof building where if the fire is anywhere in your building, you have to escape. You have to get out. There is nothing in the building that is going to stop the fire from spreading from one apartment to the next, from one floor to the next. Closing the door is definitely going to help isolate the smoke and gases and heat to allow everybody else to escape the building, but it's only a matter of time before the fire will start to spread through pipe recesses, through the walls, through there are a lot of areas where the fire can spread from one apartment to the next. So definitely something that we need to know as part of our escape plan. Again, property owners must post escape plans on the inside of every apartment door. So you should have that escape plan on the inside of your apartment door in the common area, and they need to distribute them to each unit, to new tenants, and annually during Fire Prevention Week. Okay, so we have to make sure that we have those escape plans posted in those areas. All right. Clear exits. Moving on to clear exits. So as part of this helping our family escape from the fire, and a part of this escape plan is making sure that our exits are free of any kind of clutter. We have to make sure that the exits are free and clear, that the fire escapes, the hallways, the entrance doors, roof doors, everything is clear of clutter, because not only is that helping you escape, but that is helping us as first responders get in. So we have to make sure that that is all clear of any kind of clutter whatsoever. Just so we know, it's illegal to install key locked window gates on fire escapes and double cylinder locks on apartment doors, which will trap a resident inside an apartment in the event of a fire. So understand that these gates, the window gates on the fire escape exit windows, are locked from the outside. So somebody can't come up to your window and open the gate from the outside, but the gate is openable from the inside, right? If you put a lock on the inside of it and you have a fire in your apartment and you're trying to get out that window, you're going to be flopping around to try and find a key and then be able to see to get the key in the lock and unlock that lock to open up the window. It's going to be way too late. You don't have that kind of time. You're not going to be able to see. You're not going to be able to breathe. So you cannot have a lock on that gate on the inside of the window. Okay, so make sure that we don't have that. If there are any obstacles that block your exits that don't belong to you, whether it be on the fire escapes or the staircases, notify the property owner. And yet again, if the issue is not corrected, immediately register a complaint by calling 311. Someone will come out and inspect the areas and make sure that the areas are cleared by writing a violation, and whatever has to be done will be done. The next slide is to keep your kitchen safe, okay? Keeping the area around your stove clear of towels, paper, pot holders. These are things that we take for granted that we think are very simple, but we just kind of don't pay attention to it sometimes, right? We just get a little laxed and we leave things laying around and that's what causes these fires. So we have to be very careful of that. Stand by your pan is something that we talk about all the time. With the kitchen fires, what we're seeing a lot of times is unattended cooking. People are starting to cook and then they're walking away from the stove. And listen, I'm sure we all understand, right? We're all busy. We're all multitasking. We're trying to do 10 things at the same time. Unfortunately, cooking can't be one of them, right? We can't start cooking and then walk away to go help our kids with the homework or go take a shower or go watch, a hockey game, whatever it may be. We don't want to go do that, right? We have to stay in the kitchen and make sure that we're watching the food as it's cooking, right? So never leave that cooking food unattended. Make sure that we enforce a kid-free zone around our stove of at least 3 feet, right? 3 to 5 feet. Children shouldn't be in the kitchen playing. They shouldn't be around the stove. No need for that, right? And we saw that in that fire back in 2017 in the Bronx. As a result of that fire, local law 117 came out in 2018. Property owners must provide stove knob covers for gas-powered stoves where they know or reasonably should know that a child under 6 years of age resides, okay? This is imperative that if you don't have those stove knob covers and you have children, you need to get those stove knob covers. So if you have a child under the age of 6 in your apartment, or you don't even have to have a child under 6, you may have grandkids over or whatnot every once in a while, right? So you may want those stove knob covers. So if you would like the stove knob covers, request them from your property owner. If the property owner does not provide the stove knob covers, register a complaint by calling 311, okay? Definitely important to have is those stove knob covers. Heating your home safely, okay? When using an electric space heater or any item that heats or cools. So what are we talking about? We're talking about refrigerators, air conditioners, microwaves, toaster ovens, electric space heaters. You cannot use an extension cord, all right? Any of these items have to be plugged directly into the wall, okay? They draw a tremendous amount of current, and an extension cord is not made to handle that kind of current for that amount of time. What happens in time is that the extension cord is going to start to overheat. It's going to start to melt, and that's where we're seeing our fires. So again, any item that heats or cools has to be plugged directly into the wall. Space heaters need space. Give a space heater space. At least 3 feet around the space heater should be free of anything combustible, anything that can burn. What are we seeing? A lot of times with the space heaters, we're seeing people keeping the space heaters as close as possible to them so that they get that heat blowing directly on top of them, all right? In the middle of the night, you may toss and turn, your comforter falls over, it lands on top of the space heater, and it's a recipe for disaster. So 3 feet around the space heater should be free of anything combustible. And you want to run a space heater in the room that you're looking to heat while you're still awake. When you go to sleep, you should be turning off and unplugging the space heater. It should not be running all night long. Any electrical item that you purchase, you want to make sure that you see the UL mark, Underwriters Laboratory. Underwriters Laboratory is a company that tests and inspects these items before they go out for sale to the general public, and they will put their label on it to say that it has been tested, inspected, and approved to be used. It's safe to use. So look for that UL label whenever purchasing any of these items. We never want to use our kitchen oven, gas range, or anything else to heat our home, right? You shouldn't have the oven on just to get more heat or burn, have a pot of water to try and get some steam and stuff like that. We don't want to use these alternate methods to heat our homes. If you're resorting to that to heat your home, remember that property owners are legally required to provide heat and hot water to their tenants. If you are a tenant without heat or hot water, you want to make sure that you contact your property owner first. If your property owner does not respond, then you want to register a complaint by calling 311 immediately. Do not waste time on that at all, okay? So if we have any other questions, but those are the top 6 things that we're looking to go over today.
Well, I'll just pick up on that as Julian Basil again to say that the fire code requires in order to emphasize the importance of closing all doors behind you, that a close the door notice be posted on stairwell entrances on all floors. And this is something you should see in your hallways, on all stairwell doors to alert you and remind you every time you walk by of the importance of closing the door behind you when you're leaving, escaping from a fire, but also really at all other times to keep your apartment and stairwell doors closed, because you never know when a fire could break out.
Thank you, Julian and Captain Kozo. So we also want to talk a little bit more about emergency preparedness and emergency planning. And one of the things that we've talked about today is knowing your building. So while you're making that plan with your families and or caretakers, make sure to know if you do live in a fireproof, or if you don't, put that in as part of your plan. You also want to make sure whether your building is in a coastal storm zone or not. I did share the Know Your Zone website in the chat for anyone who's interested in finding out what zone they live in. And as we've heard from Julian and Captain Kozo, making sure that the building is also notifying you and having these notices up throughout the building. Prepare yourself and your living area. As we heard, making sure that exits are clear and using our Ready New York emergency plan workbook can help you identify that important information that you need to write down. That includes the medication that you may be taking, where you might need to meet if you do have to evacuate your building, and two contacts in case you need to share information or find each other during an emergency. If you are deaf or hard of hearing, we suggest to practice alternate ways of communicating your needs through gestures, note cards, text messages, or other means. And this is why we talk about preparedness before the emergencies, so that everyone knows the information and we can prepare prior to the emergency. And if you are blind or maybe have low vision, also be prepared to explain others how to best guide you. So practicing this, getting these note cards together, or phrases that you and family members and or caretakers need to use in the case of an emergency, you just want to make sure you have those ready to go before anything happens. Another reminder is knowing when and how to shelter in place. So if you're asked to stay indoors or shelter in place, just do not leave until you are told. Lock any doors, seal any windows, air vents. You will get information as things are progressing. It is also a big reminder to practice the plan. And I think we heard this from Captain Kozo. Take the fire alarm and sound it once or twice and talk about how are we going to get out, what are the sayings that we're going to use, where are we going to meet if something happens. And these are the steps and points that we want to make sure that we are going over in our plan. In the chat, I have shared the My Emergency Plan workbook that can help you and your family answer some of these questions and plan for these events. I will now pass it off to Jessica.
So HPD has some recommendations for building residents to prepare for emergencies. I'll also try to put in the chat, we have a web page that also speaks to some of this information. And some of these things Julian has already talked about, like the building information sheet. Make sure you're getting that from your landlord or property manager and that you thoroughly review it. And also find out what your building's elevator policy is for storms or other emergencies. Particularly if you rely on the elevator to get in and out of your apartment and your building. And then find out whether your building has a way to communicate with residents during an emergency. This can vary widely between buildings in the city. So if some buildings may just be posting information in a common area of the building, some may call their residents, some have a portal that residents can go to look up information, including emergency information. So just make sure you know how your building plans on communicating with you in an emergency. And if you know any neighbors on your floor that may be vulnerable during emergencies, maybe make friends with them, help them if they ask you, if you can. It's not required, but it is good to know if there may be someone on your floor who needs assistance to evacuate or may have other issues, so you can alert your building. And then sign up for citywide emergency alerts from Notify NYC. Those are emergency alerts that New York City Emergency Management puts out, but anyone in New York City can sign up at www.nyc.gov/notify-NYC. I recommend it for everyone. It'll give you updated information following an emergency or even pre-emergency if it's a weather-related emergency that we already know is going to happen, like a coastal storm. You can get some information on that. And to the information about the Know Your Zone website, if you know what your zone is, the Notify NYC messaging will mention if evacuation during a coastal storm is required for any of the zones. You also want to make sure that if you're having a medical emergency or if someone that you know in your building is having a medical emergency, that you call 911. It's important to remember that building staff are not emergency responders, but if there's building staff in the building after you call 911, you can ask staff or somebody that you live with or another neighbor to hold the elevator and guide EMS to the appropriate apartment for someone who's having a medical emergency. And make sure that you complete the building emergency evacuation checklist that Julian mentioned. That should come with the emergency preparedness guide. We also have a link to it on the HPD website, and I can also share that in the chat before we go today. It's really just to make sure that you have a plan for what you need to do if you evacuate. And as mentioned, it is very important that you close the doors behind you when you're evacuating your apartment. Even if you have self-closing doors, just make sure that they're shut as you leave. And then be ready with any wet towels to block smoke from under doors if you can when you're sheltering in place, including the bathrooms and the vents. Next slide, please. Okay, so it is important to remember that emergency preparedness for residential buildings is different than for commercial buildings, particularly because commercial building hours might be limited to business times, while residential buildings aren't going to have a limit to the times where people need to be prepared for an emergency. And commercial buildings also tend to have on-site fire safety staff, and many residential buildings don't necessarily have staff on site 24/7, let alone fire safety staff on site 24/7. And we've mostly been talking about today about the residential buildings with 3 or more units. And as you can imagine, within New York City, there's a wide range of residential building stock where there are 3 or more units in the city. So some of these buildings are old buildings, some are new buildings, some have rental apartments, some are co-ops or condominiums, all of which really makes it the difference just to how much emergency preparedness the building can go through and what types of ways they can get in touch with you following an emergency. And one of those being that, as I already mentioned, the staffing levels on site is not the same at all residential buildings in the city. Some have a super that might live, a block or 2 away from the building. Some might have, a whole team of staff on site. Someone may not even have the super live that close and may not be able to come that quickly. So just make sure that you know what level of staff is on site at your buildings at all times. And while they are there to assist in emergency by holding, the doors open for EMS and potentially, posting signage on the elevators and such, they, as mentioned, are not emergency responders or social workers. But if you or someone that you know that lives in your building may need assistance to evacuate, it's a good idea to let the building staff know in blue skies when there is no emergency so that they can let emergency responders know that you may need assistance. And on our website, we will also share this in the chat. We have HPD's ABCs of Housing, which is HPD's Guide to Housing Rules and Regulations for Owners and Tenants. And the last updated version of this guide was 2021. So if you take a look at that, you'll understand what the rules and regulations are for owners and also some information for tenants. Next slide. Okay. So for building owners and staff, property managers, or co-op and condo boards, they should really be following the fire code and rules for Chapter 4 emergency planning. And whether they're 3 units or above, or if it's a smaller building than that, but you rent out to a tenant, they need to be registering with HPD. That's separate from getting contacted for emergencies that are citywide. They need to be registered with HPD, period. But if buildings are registered with HPD, we will also contact you during citywide emergencies. If we know that there is a coastal storm coming, we can send some information to building owners ahead of time. If it's something where there is no notice, but it is a citywide emergency potentially affecting buildings, we can send out messaging to building owners and managers following that emergency. And building owners or building managers should, to the best of their ability, be providing training to building staff on emergency planning and also how best to assist vulnerable residents with their own planning for evacuation. While building staff may not be actually assisting residents in physically in evacuation, if they can't use the elevator, they will be able to at least let emergency responders know that someone needs assistance evacuating. And they should be communicating the building's elevator policy to the residents. And as we mentioned, you should have the emergency notice if in your building, if the elevator is going to be out of service. And as we've told for residents, you should know how your building is going to get in touch with you in an emergency. Building owners should be really evaluating their communication capabilities and what they can do to notify residents in an emergency. Not every building is going to have the capability to have an online portal or be able to text all residents, but they may have, an intercom system or fire alarm system in the building, or they might be able to post signage, but make sure whatever the building owner decides that they are indicating that to their residents. And when residents call 911, building staff should be instructed to be prepared to hold the elevator, as we've mentioned, and guide EMS to the appropriate apartment. And the building should be, if someone comes to them that they may have issues evacuating in an emergency or otherwise vulnerable post-emergency, they should be keeping track of that so they can share that with emergency responders as well. Or if you don't need assistance evacuating, but there was an emergency and you may just potentially need other types of assistance afterwards, they should be making a note of that so they can check in on their residents. And then they should be reminding residents about fire and emergency preparedness with the NYC Apartment Emergency Preparedness Guide, as Julian mentioned already.
Thank you, Jessica. And a quick recap of some of the key points that we went over today. So residential buildings must follow all NYC codes. Communication between buildings and residents is key before and after an emergency. We want to make sure that everyone is educated about your buildings and to plan appropriately for emergencies. We want to remember to shut that door if there's ever a fire in your home or in your building. Remember to check on our neighbors and other residents who may be vulnerable during an event, and make sure that it's all about that no one is left behind. We did have a question come in the Q&A about the self-closing doors, and I'm not sure, maybe one of you can answer. Do these only have to be on common doors or in apartment unit doors also?
The self-closing door requirement is applicable to all apartment dwelling unit doors.
Great, thank you. And I did see another question about planning for pets. We are having a pet preparedness webinar in July, so I would keep a lookout for our webinar schedule and for the next month. And I'll give it a few more minutes for any more questions, either in the chat or the Q&A box. In the meantime, we do want to thank everyone for joining us today and remind everyone that if you are interested in an emergency preparedness workshop, you can request Ready New York at nyc.gov Ready New York, or our fire safety presentations are also available at FDNYsmart.org. We also welcome everyone to follow us on our social media channels and subscribe to our channels. If you know anyone that might be interested in this webinar today, it was recorded and will be up on the New York City Emergency Management YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. So you can share it from there if if you know of anyone else that might be interested in this topic. I'll give it a few more minutes, but I don't see any more questions coming in. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions. So once again, thank you for joining us today.